I was 19.
Just out of high school?
Yeah, I graduated in 41. June of 41. Pearl Harbor was December of 41. So I mean, no, our high school class was ripe candidates for this whole bit. I enlisted in the Air Aviation Cadets in May of 43. Passed the test and the physical, but didn't get called up until October. And then we went to, let's see, Nashville, the classification center, which was a deal because we ended up getting quarantined for measles and staying for an extra couple months. Then we went to Maxwell Field for pre-flight and went through that, and then went to basic or primary flying school at, let's see, I think it was Decatur, Alabama, and then to Greenwood, Mississippi for basic, and Columbus for advanced, where I got my wings. And I have to add one thing there. I have a grandson who's now a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force who got his wings at Columbus, Mississippi, which I pinned my wings on him.
Oh wow, great experience.
So after that, from there I went to let's see, well, Louisiana. Right offhand, I can't remember the name, but it was a B-26 outfit, and they had 700 flyers, pilots, and 60 airplanes. I did get my flight time in because I knew two guys who were upperclassmen of mine who we flew in a B-25, and I got what we called qualified dual, which was our 4 hours of time. And after a while we came through that they needed some pilots in Tampa, which was the 463rd, and myself and two other fellows were sent over there. And one of them bought a car, and we drove over, and we had quite a time. But I got over there, and with the 463rd, I ran into a Captain Grandy, and I was assigned to be his co-pilot. They were going to do a practice run, bombing run on Atlanta. And I said, wait a minute. I said, you better get somebody else. I said, I've never even seen a B-17. And so after that, I did get assigned to somebody and did see a B-17, went through training there and went overseas, or were scheduled to go overseas. I got bumped by the group snoops, and Seymour Florsheim, who was the first pilot, and I went over on the Liberty ship with about 200 of our other guys. It took us 29 days, and I swear, well, we were in a convoy, but I swear Columbus crossed the Atlantic quicker than that. Well, we have a group like navigator and a group bombardier or a group pilot, and that's what the group snoops were. Because like our group, we have Seymour Florsheim was our first pilot, but Piercy was our bombardier and I was a co-pilot, and we were two got bumped, and then there were two, and then the group bombardier and I think the group navigator, let's see, 1, 2, 3, and one of the senior group pilots went with Florsheim, and they flew the southern route through South America and Africa. I think what happened is they didn't want to go by ship.
So they could choose plane and that would bump you down to ship.
Yeah,
Oh, okay. I understand.
yeah, we went with basically our ground crew. And we're loaded on the ship. We went through staging together. Yeah, then we all met up in Foggia with where we were supposed to be. So anyway, we landed in North Africa. We spent about a week in North Africa, which was interesting. We had one incident. I was with two of our G2 guys, and the three of us went out and found the officers club, and they said, oh, they were having doings that night, but we had to make reservations, so I signed my name, and we came back later that night, and here our two warrant officers already had been there with a bunch of British officers, and this is what I have called my red wine, white wine story for a long time, because we went home about 14 guys in a Jeep, and we had one British major who was a bacteriologist or something, and he was hiring a kite, and he wanted the warrant officer to teach him to drive the Jeep. He ended up sleeping overnight in a sand dune there, and we boarded. We went on a luxury liner to Naples the next day, and we never saw him the rest of the way. And the one thing I remember there is it was manned by the British, and the waiter told us this is our mustard and it's pretty hot, and we had one of our bombardiers from California. He says, oh, I can take that. And he put it on his bread and started to eat it. And if you ever seen in the movies where a guy turns red right up this way, he sure did. So anyhow, we went to Naples, stayed overnight there. We got in the bombing raid there because the Germans bombed that night. And we had an old guy who was, I think he was a major too. He had been an old school teacher, and he was one of the ground officers. And he told us all to stay away from the windows, you don't want to get killed. And we thought, hell, that's what we're over here for. I mean, this is silly. So anyhow, we go to Foggia and start flying there, and that was in beginning of April. And let's see, my fourth mission.
You were flying as co-pilot?
I was flying co-pilot. I flew most of the missions as co-pilot. But we went and bombed Treviso in northern Italy, and they said there was only 3 anti-aircraft guns there, and that's what shot us down. And we told them if there were 3, they must have 10 barrels each. But that one we ended up ditching in the Adriatic. The plane stayed pretty much afloat. One fellow, our radio man, got hurt because the ball turret hit his ankle, crashing through the door. But looking back, you're supposed to drop the ball turret, but we kept the ball turret. That plane stayed afloat a lot longer. But anyhow, we had our radio, our escape radio, and we had the Canadian Air Sea Rescue come with a bi-wing 1929 amphibian, which loaded all 10 of us on, but he couldn't take off. He had too much weight, so he taxied to the shore. We get to the shore and we get loaded into a couple ambulances, and these ambulance drivers take off up the railroad tracks on the wood ties, and I thought, good God, we just saved ourselves, we're going to get killed here. But anyhow, we stayed with the ambulance outfit, and matter of fact, I didn't, but the rest of the gang played poker with them and cleaned them out. Well, I went back flying again, and I ended up with, I had 32 missions in when I got shot down the second time, and that was over Czechoslovakia. We were going to bomb at Blackhammer, but we got shot down about 100 miles south of there, and
That was a result of flak.
no, it was the result of 80 Ju-88s and Hinkle 111s, and we got, our tail gunner got killed, and a couple other guys, I don't know what all Bill told you, but he was in the back. I was up in the front and I didn't see anything, but we ended up getting the plane shot away, and we ended up we bailed everybody out except the guy who got killed. And I know Lindblom was first pilot and I was co-pilot. He and I stood on the deck and discussed who should go out first, mainly because I outranked him. I was the first lieutenant, he was the second lieutenant. But I went first. And the one thing, we were at about 25,000 feet. And the one thing I remembered well, I used to wonder why we went to parachute lectures, which we used to have the parachute guys give us and what to do and all that. And as I bailed out of that plane, those lectures went through my mind just like that, completely. I thought enough, when I pulled the ripcord, I tucked it in my jacket pocket. So we got floated down and I landed in a field in Czechoslovakia. We got picked up by the Germans then, and there were about 4 or 5 of us, and they marched us down a railroad track. I ran into a work crew, and the one guy in the work crew looks at us and says, "Oh," he says, "this is Friday," in English. He says, "This is Friday." He says, "You're going to have a lousy meal." And I thought, where in the hell were you about an hour ago? I stopped at one place on the way, because where we were in Czechoslovakia and where I was heading, it was all the way across Germany. And we went to one place and they had me in a room with a couple of soldiers, and I was in good shape. I had about a 3-day growth of beard and a patch on my nose where the parachute shroud clipped me. And then there was a German major there. I had a pretty good idea what his rank was, but he was, if there's anything like a Hollywood scene, this German major in his great uniform, his bald head, the whole works, was sitting behind the desk, and then there was a little guy in a black suit who was a Gestapo guy. And so he asked me my name, rank, and serial number, and I gave it to him, which is all we were supposed to do. And then they asked me my birthday, and I said, as a soldier in the United States Army, I don't need to answer that. And this Gestapo guy says, "You're nothing but a murderer and a terrorflieger." And this German major tells him to shut up. He's an officer, treat him with respect. That ended that. So then from there on we went to, Frankfurt. Yeah. And was in solitary confinement for about a week. And they tried to find out who else was with our crew, and we just kept quiet. And they interrogated us, and that was it. Then we went to Wetzlar. And from Wetzlar we went to Stalag 1, which is Barth on the Baltic, which I was there for 10 months. So. This was strictly an officer's camp.
I see.
There was roughly almost 10,000 of us. 6,000 or 4,000 were British and 6,000 were us. But ended up with my roommates, our four crew, our navigator and bombardier and first pilot and me. And then, well, that's way back. Wait a minute. Okay. I had two other guys come in, and one I recognized had been a neighbor of mine back in Pittsburgh. He lived right around the corner, and before I was shot down, my mother had sent me a clipping of him that was in the paper, and he had been there ahead of me. He was with the 8th Air Force, and then I had to go back to when I was still flying. The 8th Air Force flew a mission from England to Russia to Italy, and we all took, each of our squadrons there took 2 airplanes. Well, one of those airplanes, the first pilot on it, Bob Champ, had been my roommate in advanced flying school, so I know him. So shortly after they left, I got shot down and went back and ended up in this prison camp. About 4 weeks later, who comes marching into prison camp with Bob Champ and his crew, and he was my roommate for the rest of the war. In the 10 months I was there, I probably got maybe 2 showers, and they were usually cold. Our camp was set up as what we called a wing, and we had 4 compounds, which were each a group, and then each barracks was a squadron. So we knew if we got into any trouble what we should do, or where the commands were coming from, which never happened, but I've talked to a bunch of them. Well, I was commander of our POW post in Danville, and I've talked to a couple of the guys who were enlisted men, not Air Force, in the Wehrmacht, and they got treated pretty rough. I mean, we didn't get, they didn't lay any hand on us. They could put you in solitary, which they did. We got some Red Cross parcels, but they were pretty sparse. We did get potatoes, and we got cabbage. What they call beautiful cabbage here is the black cabbage, and we got that, and that makes a nice coleslaw. And for a while we took turns cooking. Then when things got scarce, Lindblom and I decided that we'll do the cooking, and he'd cook one day and I'd cook the other, because we had better control of the amount of food we could do.
Was this over your immediate group of guys? I mean,
yes, yeah, the 20
people?
guys in our room.
Okay.
Now, some of the other places did it differently, but this is the way we did it. And the one, as I was telling Jan the other day, we used to, one of the sayings was, when we dished out the food and ate it, that was good, what there was of it. Well, actually, everybody worked within their room. I mean, we had a captain, and he and the first lieutenant had their own little office, and he was a guy from, had been a B-24 pilot, got shot down on his second mission, and he sort of was well, pardon me, but a horse's ass. And but he used to get into discussions with us about flying combat, and most of us had 30 or 40 combat missions already behind us, and we weren't about to listen to that. I had one thing about him. We built a chess set out of, we did a lot of work with the tin cans. We had what we called Clem cans, which were like, remember the old coffee can, which was about yay big?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's what the Clem cans were. But we had bed slat with a slit in it and a table knife to cut the steel, cut the metal. And we made dishes that way, and we made pots and pans. Our the room next to ours, the guys in there even built a clock with the tin foil, and worked fine. But a lot of guys did it. I mean, we had all kind of time. I read 64 books in 10 months. Because you had, I mean, what else do you do? But other than Lindblom and I doing the cooking, the other guys then would do what they needed to do to clean up and that. And we made our own beds, and of course we did that anyhow, whether we were there or someplace else. Then we started discussing women, and we always ended up on food. That was the worst thing we had.
Yeah.
I think the YMCA donated the books. First off, I started reading plays because all the guys who were there before us had all the good books, and that was what was left. But no, I remember the one book I remember reading was Random Harvest by Hilton, and I couldn't get over how it ended. And I mean, I've seen the movie, but unless you read the book, I mean, it was so much, I mean, you knew what was going to happen if you saw the movie. Reading the book, you didn't.
I'll have to read that.
I was almost late for a formation trying to finish the story. By the time the Soviets got there, they were gone. They disappeared. Most of them were pretty old guys, and an awful lot of them all spoke English, and a bunch of them had been storekeepers or teachers in England that came back to Germany. And the only one problem we had once, and what we did is we had a lieutenant colonel was our senior officer in our compound. And then we used to line up in rows of 5 so they could count us. And then each barracks had a captain as head of the barracks, and the rest of us were all first or second lieutenants. And we had one fella who was commander, and I watched Stalag 17 and some of these, and it really is nothing like it. But we had a commander, head of the one who was a pretty nice guy, and then he got transferred, and they brought another guy in, and he was a major, and he was strictly a Nazi guy. And the rules were that you're supposed to, they should support the senior officer, and that was our lieutenant, or our lieutenant colonel. So this guy wouldn't salute him, so Lieutenant Colonel says, we don't line up. And about 4 days of that, finally the guy saluted, and Lieutenant Colonel says, line up, and we lined up, and they counted us, and that was it. So the Lieutenant Colonel ended up in solitary for a week. After the war ended, we had a chance to go through the town, and they had a air base right next to our compound, and they had jet engines, and those were the first jet engines we ever saw or knew about. I mean, we were still all prop guys. So we stayed there about a week before the 91st Bomb Group flew in on that air base, and we loaded on that, and they flew us into Reims, France, and we were put on a train there right next to Eisenhower's train when he was at the Red Schoolhouse working out the peace treaty. And from there we went to Lucky Strike. But we got fed there, and we got new uniforms and the whole works there. And we could take a shower, which we did about twice a day there, and go through the delousing bit. And we got new underwear, which we used to go back 2 or 3 times and get several sets of new underwear. And we got our pinks and greens uniforms, and then we ended up, after a while, well, we had Eisenhower come in finally, and he spoke to the gang, and he explained that he was trying to get us out of there as fast as possible, and we would have elected him president right then and there. He was so sincere. Because they fed us pretty good in Lucky Strike.
Okay.
Because what they were doing, what we got in Lucky Strike were pancakes, potatoes, bread. I mean, sometimes the Army's smart, and they're getting us fed up so we aren't sending a bunch of skinny guys home to their mothers. So, and Lindblom, his character, but he ended up talking to the mess sergeant and telling what an awful time we had had in prison camp. And the mess sergeant had a bunch of German prisoners working for him, and he had them working like nobody's business. So that was that. So I ended up going back to the States in a Coast Guard troop transport, which we crossed the Atlantic in 6 days. And from there we went to, well, what is it, Boston. I forget what camp it was. They had a steak dinner and a dance for us. And then we went on a train going south, as we got shipped back to where we came from. And I know I was a packet commander there. And I know we went through New York. First time I was ever, and the last time I was ever in New York, at about the 6th level in Grand Central Station. And I had to tell the guys to put their shirts on. We're in civilized country. And went to Fort Dix, and then got home in 10 days. That was it. My son and I went back over visiting the POW camps I was in, and we went to Czechoslovakia, and I've been corresponding with a couple guys over there, and with email it's nice, you can correspond. And anyhow, this guy and we had an interpreter. Matter of fact, she was Czech, and but she taught English in a university in California. But we were in a field, and I'm about 99% sure that was the field I landed in. And this woman come across the road from a house on the other side, wanted to know if we were trying to steal her land, and we explained to her what we were doing. And she says, oh, she says, I remember after everybody cleared out, we went over and got the parachute and took them home and made clothes for the kids. She says, I was 10 years old at the time.